Deuteronomy chapter 6, and we got pretty much through the first 3 verses last week, but wanted to point out something that I'm not sure if I really brought out. He mentions here, keep the commands and regulations that I give you, so that you may fear Yahweh your God by keeping all his decrees. Now, we usually think of the word fear as being afraid. Clearly, that's not what the word here in Hebrew means. Because he says, keep the commands so that you may fear. Does keeping God's commands make you afraid of him?
No.
No. Okay.
Just the opposite.
Right. You feel more confidence coming into his presence if you're keeping his commands. Okay, and then it goes on, keep the commands so that you may fear Yahweh, and by keeping them, so you may enjoy a long life. Okay, clearly the word here has more to do with reverence than it does with fear. Okay, in other words, here is how you reverence God. Here is how you hold him in awe. We all make a lot of special attention to what is called the Shema. Okay, it's supposed to be the holiest confession in Judaism. And yet, do you realize that exact same phrase is used in chapter 4, verse 1, chapter 5, verse 1, and then in chapter 6, where we're at, verse 3, okay, and then in chapter 9, verse 1, and in chapter 20, verse 3. Okay?
I think he's trying to tell us something?
Well, the point is, it's an attention getting. Hear this, hear and conform. In a couple of the places, it has nothing to do with who is God, as much as it is, hear, O Israel, I'm giving you the land, go in and take it. And in a couple other cases, it's like, hear, O Israel, hear the commands, obey them. Okay, only one is like this one. Hear, Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone. Okay, that's the only theological one. Okay, and Hear, O Israel is also used in other parts of the prophets and other books. Okay, but this one verse seems to have been singled out and held in especially high esteem. And why? Because it's essentially an oath of loyalty. Okay, now you'll notice that I passed out chumishes, and that's for a reason. The Hertz Chumash on Deuteronomy 6:4 has 4 possible translations of the Shema. And it should be on page 769. And we mentioned last week that the basic difference is whether you're going to translate Yahweh as our God in the attributive or the substantive method. Okay, it means the same thing either way, but one, it's a matter of emphasis. Yahweh our God, just assuming he's our God, or Yahweh is our God, stating clearly this is who our God is in the substantive form. But if you look at the note on the bottom of page 769 next to verse 4, let's go ahead and read that together because it's rather significant, I think. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Or, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Okay, that's held to by Sifri and Septuagint and most Jewish translation commentators. It sums up the teaching of the first and second commandments. The Lord is our God, and he is one. The translation given by AJ here, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, is less acceptable, for if the declaration only enunciated the divine unity, it would be sufficient to have said, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Some moderns follow Rashbam's translation, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone.
That's JPS.
JPS does it also?
JPS does.
Okay. And I think that really is much more fitting to the context of the time, because they were struggling with giving up the gods of Egypt. And this is an oath of loyalty right after the 10 Commandments is given. Okay, chapter 5, 10 Commandments, the covenant. And then Moses turns to him and says, Yahweh is our God. How did the 10 Commandments begin? First commandment, I am Yahweh your God who saved you. Okay? And then it comes along, Yahweh alone, or Yahweh only. Not Yahweh is one, because they aren't They aren't worried about Trinitarian issues. They're worried about having Yahweh and the Ashtoreth. And if you remember last week, I handed out sheets that took chapter 5 through chapter 11 and made it into one sentence. Because sometimes, we say so much about something that you miss the fact that it's connected to what is before and what's after it. And that one sentence summary of those 6 chapters really summarizes that those 6 chapters are a commentary on the first 2 commandments. Because when you start looking at chapter 12 to 26, you see a lot of case law and things that are commentary on the other 7 commandments, really. And you see a lot of explanation. But there's so much explanation in chapter 5 through chapter 11 that you miss that it's a commentary on the first 2. And it always bothered me because I said, well, how come there's no specific commentary on the first 2 commandments? Well, there was. It was just so big that I missed it. I missed it. You couldn't see the trees for the forest, or I couldn't see the forest for the trees. Well, that's what happens there. So this is the beginning, really, of the commentary on the first 2 commandments. Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone. Now, if you'll notice when we recite the Shema, that's the way I recite it. And that's because I think that is the best translation. And Rashbam, of course, is one of the famous rabbinical commentators. Anyway, in your notes, you'll notice I also put down references in your first Chumash in the back on page 920. There's about a 4 or 5 page article dealing with the history of the Shema, the implications of the Shema, both positive and negative. I would recommend taking time to read that article sometime. Don't try and do it now, because otherwise you'll just be too distracted. The Chumashes are always here. They're always available. If you need to borrow one, feel free, or Xerox off a copy of those pages. Take them home, mark them up, memorize them. And I was going to run off some copies out of the Eitz Chaim, but I don't know where it is. Probably in one of my other 3 or 4 miscellaneous briefcases. Anyway, the Shema proper is not just Deuteronomy 6:4. The Shema proper, and I was going to print this out for you, maybe we'll hand it out next week, is actually...
Shema proper.
I know the Shema.
You've got it on the handwritten here.
I've written out the references here. I was going to put all 3 of them together. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, chapter 11, verses 13 through 21, and Numbers 15, 37, and 31. Okay, that's the total Shema. Okay, so when it says that a faithful Jew is to recite the Shema 3 times a day, it's not just Deuteronomy 6:4 that he's reciting. It's 3 distinct paragraphs, 2 out of Deuteronomy and 1 from Numbers. But that's the whole Shema. And it's a lot more comprehensive than just saying, Yahweh's our God, Yahweh alone. It also involves the whole idea of writing the law on your hands and your forehead, putting on the doorposts of your house, teaching it to your children, and the injunction here in verse 5, which I find to be as important as verse 4. Love Yahweh your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. I remember the first time I read that when I was in Bible college. I said, that has got to be the key verse of the entire Old Testament. In fact, one of the key verse of the Bible. And as I began to study Scripture, and as I began to really understand what the New Testament was all about, the more I realized how important that verse was. And following it then, and these commandments I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Okay, right there, the command. Put these commandments on your heart. Okay, what's the new covenant about? It's the greater fulfillment of this covenant, because the Holy Spirit's going to come and He's going to write the commands on your heart. So what's being given here is ultimately what God is aiming at. If you want to know what God's goals are, there it is right there. That's what He's working for. Okay. Now, think about this. And these commandments will be upon your heart, and press them on your children. Do you see a further relation to this in the Lord's Prayer? Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What is this encouraging? That there be a kingdom where His will is done on earth as it is in heaven. So when Yeshua gives the Lord's Prayer, he's completely, exactly right in line with the Shema. He's emphasizing it. If you read the Lord's Prayer through Jewish eyes, you get a very different take on it, a much more full take on it, than you do if you're just reading it like a Gentile walking in off the street. Or this is not a kingdom that doesn't exist. This is a kingdom that is in progress. Okay? And if you think about progressive revelation means God starts out with us in what we would consider baby talk, and then he teaches us as we get older and learn more and more. Now, granted that God is so wise and all-knowing, that anything he says to us in baby talk, because we can't possibly think on his level. Okay? But Scripture does the same thing. You don't start out, Ellie, with quantum physics. No, you start out with 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, and then you build from there. Well, God is doing the same thing with us in history. Anyway, just so you know, when I say the Shema the way I do, I'm following Rashbam. I'm not making it up out of my own head. Anyway, you probably knew that anyway. Now, here's the question. Okay, we know that you're to teach your children. And he says to impress them on your children. Okay, think about it like this. Do you know what an imprint is?
It's like an engraving.
Okay, I'm thinking with animals.
Oh, it's like branding?
When a baby bird is born, the first thing it sees is imprinted on it as its mother.
Oh.
This is mommy. Okay, and the bird will follow you around as if you're mommy. If there is no, if you want ducks to follow you, be there when they hatch. Okay, and then they will follow you around. Okay, and psychologists call this imprinting. I think that the idea here of impress them on your children is very much like imprinting. Okay, you want to imprint these commandments on your children. Well, how are you going to do that? You're going to talk about them constantly so that they're part of their conscience. They can't look at the world without looking at the world through the covenant. So anytime they see something in action or they hear something, they immediately evaluate it according to the covenant. Now, how many of us here were raised that way? No. Okay, one of us was raised somewhat that way. Maybe not from a messianic standpoint, but from the standpoint of at least the church. You grew up looking at things. Oh, okay, yeah. You were too. Yeah, I forgot you were my daughter.
For a moment.
Well, actually, it's because I couldn't see her behind mommy. So, it's a great thing to raise your children where they see the world through the eyes of the covenant. Where when they look out, they say, "This is right. This is wrong," and they have an instinctive knowledge of that. It's just basic to them, not where they have to stop and evaluate everything. You know, I grew up basically with 2 values: don't lie, don't steal, and that was essentially the only morals I knew. And as I became a believer, I had to begin evaluating everything. Okay, well, is this right? Why is it right? Why is it wrong? How do you know? Okay, so I dealt in the Scripture very heavily. And in a sense, I've imprinted on myself things that should have been pushed on me as a child, but weren't. Okay, well now, we as adults who are parents and grandparents, our jobs are to impress or imprint the covenant on our children and grandchildren. Okay. And some of us have already passed up on that first chance, so we get the second chance, hopefully. And then the question is, verse 8, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Okay. I really have no question about the fact that we're supposed to have the commandments on our door frames and our gates. Okay. The question is this figurative language for tying them on your hand and forehead? Reading this passage, you wouldn't think so. Okay. But if you look over to Exodus chapter 13, there's actions that seem to make this a symbolic thing. Exodus 13, verses 7 through 16. Okay, and there we read this song about, Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days. Nothing with yeast in it is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. On that day, tell your son, I do this because of what Yahweh did for me when I came out of Egypt. This observance will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead, but the law of Yahweh is to be on your lips. For Yahweh brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You must keep this ordinance at the appointed time year after year. After Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you, as he promised on oath to you and your forefathers, you are to give over to Yahweh the first offspring of every womb. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to Yahweh. Redeem them with a lamb, every firstborn donkey, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. In days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand Yahweh brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, Yahweh killed every firstborn in Egypt, both man and animal. That is why I sacrifice to Yahweh the first male offspring of every womb, and redeem each of my firstborn sons. And it will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead, that Yahweh brought us up out of Egypt with his mighty hand. So the observances of Feast of Unleavened Bread and making a sacrifice for the firstborn is again like a symbol on your hand and your forehead. Okay. The question is, does it literally mean to tie it on your hand and forehead? And then the question comes up is, does anybody or has anybody ever done that? Okay. In traditional Judaism, people will go in for morning and evening prayer and they'll put the phylacteries on. But this doesn't say put them on during morning and evening prayer. It says do it. It doesn't sound to me like it's saying a temporary thing or once or twice a day thing. It sounds like it's a permanent, all the time thing. Again, there are a lot of things that fall under ritual observance. Think about this: overeating. That's more of a ritual observance because are you hurting somebody? Are you mistreating a person? Mistreating another person is really the weightiest part of the law. Treating another person badly. The other parts are more on the ritualistic side. And you want to do both, but make sure you treat people properly. Be kind and courteous. Okay, treat them as if they're made in the image of God. Why do we want to treat them as if they're made in the image of God?
Because they are.
Because they are. And this is one of those intuitively obvious answers here. Now, historically, from reading in the Chumash, it seems like phylacteries weren't developed until after the Babylonian exile. Okay, so the idea of literally writing the commandments on your hand seems to be rather late in Israeli history, which makes me think, again, this is probably more metaphorical. We know they wrote it on their gates, okay, but did they actually wear it in their hands and head? Which leads to another question. In the book of Revelation, what does the Antichrist do? Where does he put his mark?
On your hand or your forehead.
Right, your hand or your
Imitating
forehead.
Christ.
And it says that God marks his people on the hand and forehead.
Right.
Now, my brother some years ago brought this up as in an allegorical form, in the sense of it's what you're doing and thinking that matters. Okay, are you living and thinking the law, God's righteousness?